So thank you, all of you. Thank you, everyone, for attending this online event. This event is organized by a small project that I'm coordinating that's called Working on Demand. That's funded by the Planetary Wellbeing framework of the Universitat Pompeu Fabra. The project will study the main stories and practice shared on social media about and by workers on demand. What are those workers? Are like usually we associate this with drivers like from Uber, riders from Glovo or Deliveroo and so on, but there are also another type of workers, platform workers, that Dr. Cheryll probably will explain today in her talk. This project from Planetary Wellbeing also born from a bigger project that is funded by the Spanish Ministry of Science and Education, if I'm not wrong with the name of the ministry, that's directed by Professor Carlos Scolari, that's also present today, where he looks at, not just he, but the whole research team study the learning and teaching process of those kind of platform work. So I asked Dr. Cheryll to join us today. Dr. Cheryll, as if you don't know her, I'll do a briefly introduction about her bio, about her trajectory. She's right now an associate professor from the Salle University in Manila in Philippines. She has a PhD in communication and new media at the National University of Singapore, a master's in development studies from the Institute of Social Studies from the Erasmus University in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands. Amsterdam, no, in the Netherlands. And a bachelor in political science at the University of Philippines. She was also visiting fellow at the Institute of Sociology and Anthropology of Peking University. She had a grant from Ford Foundation, that is an Asian scholarship foundation as well. I met her when she was in the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in the School of Media and Communications, when she had also a grant from Australia, APEC Women in Research Fellowship, and we were doing also a course together while I was doing visiting in there. She has been researching different topics. She's interested in social inequality, and right now she'll share with us her experience on research, doing like kind of an ethnographic work, both online and offline, with platform works that carry online labor and micro work. There are also micro work intermediaries. And to complete this whole bio, Cheryll also supports open access research, and she's part of the steering committee of a website called Media Archive that I'll share with you in the chat if you're interested also in open access. So here is the archive that Dr. Cheryll Soriano is also in the steering committee. So I'll stop talking, I'll turn off my camera and give the voice to Dr. Cheryll Soriano.
Thanks very much, Fernanda. Let me just work on sharing my slides. Can I just check if you can see it all right?
Yes, we can.
I hope you could. All right, thanks very much. All right, so good day, bon dia to everyone. I'm glad that I can use a little bit of Spanish that I learned from college. And thanks very much to everyone for joining the talk, and especially to the Universidad Pompeu Fabra, the research team, and of course my friend Dr. Fernanda Perez de Sa for organizing this and for inviting me over. It's great that this is possible to be done, even with the challenging circumstances that we have right now. So I'll be sharing our research, but more particularly talking around the intersections of digital labor and social media. I'll go around this outline for my talk today. I'll first give a snapshot of our research on platform labor and worker solidarities, and also about the rise of skill makers or influencers emerging in the context of the platform labor economy on social media. And then I'll move on to thinking about the intersections of social media and digital labor. And then third and lastly, I'll speak about some critical reflections on researching digital labor on social media. I very much look forward to our engagement, whatever kind of platform labor, digital labor research you're engaged in. It's very interesting for me to know how the findings that I'll be sharing or insights I'll be sharing kind of resonate with your personal experiences with research. So when I speak about platform labor, or as Mark Graham and Anwar speak in their work, the planetary labor markets, these planetary labor markets are normally categorized into two clusters. So the first is Crowdwork, which I am focusing on in my research together with my colleagues in the university, but there's also work on demand via apps. So both of them operate within the context of labor platforms, technology applications, but work on demand via apps match workers and the customers are normally based within the same country. They do different kinds of work, from cleaning to driving to delivery, while Crowdwork, on the other hand, is a kind of a labor platform arrangement where workers and clients are matched by the platform. So clients can be a firm, a client can be an individual. Many of them are based in the global north, but also they're pretty scattered all across the country. But many clients, based on some research, is that they're based in the global north, and many of the workers are based globally, but a majority of them are based in the global south. The kind of work that a worker can obtain from Crowdwork platforms like Upwork, onlinejobs.ph, or Fiverr, or FreeUp, for example, are diverse. Sometimes the literature calls this micro tasks or micro work. And so these are small kinds of jobs or tasks that are outsourced to a worker without the need for a formal BPO company to be established in the country, say the Philippines. So the work is purely done and negotiated online or bid out online. So interestingly, I took a screenshot of freelancer.com. It offers many different kinds of jobs, from web development to customer service, but there are also writing jobs. And when I was initially doing this research, I was shocked that there is also ghostwriting jobs, and specifically academic writing ghostwriting jobs offered on the platform, which some workers can work on. And so I'll be sharing my reflections on social media and digital labor research, drawing from two particular works. The first is on entrepreneurial solidarities, where we look at the social media collectives among Filipino digital platform workers, and specifically crowd workers. And the second one is it came out as a book chapter, but here we look at the rise of a specific category of workers whom we call skill makers or brokers, that are emerging as a special category of workers that are promoting and influencing the popularity of platform labor in the Philippines. So a little bit of a background on how we look at platform labor in the context of the Philippines. We know, and even as we look at work on demand via apps like workers on Grab or Uber, for example, or crowd work like Upwork, the common understanding is that this is encompassable as digital sweatshops in a digital age where workers are put in precarious conditions. And this is very much documented in the literature, the different conditions that many of these workers grapple with: insecurity, labor seasonality, lack of bargaining capacity, and so on and so forth. And if anyone is interested, there's a lot of research on this, and I can share with you some references in relation to that. However, it's important for us, and we realized this as we were doing in the study in the Philippines, is that we need to see the label of digital sweatshops maybe in a more critical way, especially because in the Philippines, platform labor is heavily promoted by the government and even by the workers themselves as a viable alternative to unemployment or underemployment, meaning in the context of always or common informality or common lack of employment, this presents to be a viable alternative for many Filipino workers. This is also very much aligned with the policy of the government to deploy Filipino workers overseas as labor migrants. But this time, they don't have to go out of the country. They can still earn dollars without having to leave home. At the same time, many of these workers who have moved into labor platforms were former call center or contact service agents in BPO companies, but they got tired also because of very unfair labor practices in call center work. So even though call center work or BPO have more security of tenure, they have more progression possibilities, they've left that because of night shift and also high levels of stress in that environment, but also the struggle of the huge traffic in the city that makes it difficult for them to travel from work to home. And so therefore, there are competing narratives as we look at this platform labor in the Philippines, one of precarity and also one of opportunity, right? So as illustrated in this slide. And so we look at, when we began starting to do the research, we did not intentionally look at social media at the forefront. So social media was not at the beginning of our goal, but as we look at the understanding of the conditions of workers involved in platform labor, we started to look at possibilities for collective formations. And the question of collective formation is a tricky question in the context of the gig economy or platform work. And there are many reasons presented by the literature that may constrain the possibility for collective formation among platform workers, even if we're talking about Uber drivers or we're talking about crowd workers. First is that they are fragmented. They're located in different parts. They are very, well, for Grab drivers, they're very mobile, but for crowd workers, they're based in their homes. They do not have a lot of capacity to come together physically because they work from home. And so they're isolated, but also they're doing different kinds of jobs that makes it possibly difficult for them to identify. So professionally, you have crowd workers who are maybe apps developers, some are digital marketers, some are online secretaries, some are a data encoders. So there is no professional identification that they may be able to come together easily. The second is the transient nature of work. Some of them still have physical work, full-time work, and they do this as a gig or part-time, or some of them come and go, and some of them also have taken on platform work as full-time for them, right? So this is their full-time work going on platform labor. But that the transient nature of coming and going may make it hard for collective formations to emerge. The third is them seeing themselves more as entrepreneurs or as consultants, quote unquote. Some workers label themselves as that, and they do not want to be labeled as workers easily. Right? So that's another thing because of the peculiarity of the kind of labor arrangement. And the last one is because there is no clear employer-employee relationship. Who can they bargain with in relation to whatever claims they might make? But however, the other side of the literature is challenging the idea that, well, even in the context of precarious labor, perhaps we have to look at possible ways by which these workers can come together and organize. Because even though there are a lot of constraints, there are certainly struggles that they will have to contend with, and they might be coming up with resistive strategies to address those challenges. And so at the back of our heads, we are looking at, okay, so are they unionizing? What kinds of formations is possible in the context of platform labor given the challenges? But at the back of our heads, is there a role played by social media in relation to these solidaristic formations? And so This is part of a larger ethnography on platform labor in the Philippines, where we're initially trying to understand why many Filipinos are attracted to platform labor, even though the literature presents this to be a very precarious kind of work. And second one is to really understand the economic, social, and moral dimensions of Filipino workers' experiences in here. And then eventually that's when we realized the importance of looking at solidaristic formations as well. But given the approach of wanting to understand deep structures and deep stories, we thought that a digital ethnography approach is the most perhaps appropriate approach to take on this. Especially that we were starting with first understanding how workers grapple with being in the middle of precarity. Workers recognize that it's a difficult condition, but at the same time, they also see this as an opportunity for them. And so we wanted to understand why they keep doing this work, but also what are the conditions of their work and how they challenge those work conditions. And so these are three principles that I take from the literature. There are many other principles in digital ethnography, but the first is it being iterative and inductive, a kind of a research process. By iterative and inductive, it means that the methodology expands or changes as we went along the research. And I'll show this in a little bit in the next slide, what kinds of methods we engaged. But what we did was to begin with observing workers' practices and talking to them. And that was the time, after having gathered some initial data, that's when it became apparent to us that we need to look at social media a little bit more closely. And therefore, social media research became apparent. We added this as an added methodology when we have understood a little bit further its importance amongst workers. The second important principle that we have taken is the idea of the digital amid the broader labor environment. Of course, the term used in the book Digital Ethnography is decentering the digital. And I think what this implies is that we need to examine the implications of the digital and transformations that accompany the digital, but not solely focus on the digital only, but look at this amid the broader media environment. And it also implies looking at not just digital methods or using digital methods, but using other methods appropriate to study these digital transformations. And I took note of this particularly because it was crucial for us if we looked only at studying the platform via a walkthrough method, it might have been difficult for us to understand the larger context and the larger labor context under which platform labor operates locally. And the third one is openness, right? So the idea of openness in terms of the goals of research and how the goals of research can also expand, contract, transform, and change as we go along the research process. And one significant understanding here is that digital labor solidarities was also not initially our objective. The idea of understanding solidaristic formations became apparent when we saw that the workers do understand the opportunities available in platform labor, but they also are very open to acknowledging that they are having difficulty in recognizing the severe challenges of platform labor. And so putting the worker in the center of that dialectical tension, it became apparent for us that it's important to understand what kinds of solidarities can come out of that. And so we participated in online freelancer events initially. We went to, so we call them online freelancer because this is the preferred term of the workers. We call them crowd workers in the literature, but locally, Filipinos call themselves online freelancers, even if technically online freelancers encompasses a broader range of different freelancers. And so these events were held offline. They will gather together in co-working spaces or online as well. Or they will do the events on Facebook or on YouTube, etc. And then we visited their co-working spaces. So we also wrote an article on co-working spaces and looking at what kinds of activities are held there. But that's what allowed us to meet workers and talk to them as they perform their work as well. And that allowed them, so for some of them, they shared with us how they perform work, what kind of work they do, etc. And so we interviewed workers, asking them, so some of them whom we interviewed in their houses, they showed us their workspaces as well. And then eventually we realized the importance of looking at influencers. So we also interviewed influencers, platform owners, especially those who operate with Filipino workers as their target, and then concerned government agencies eventually as we moved along the project. We hired research assistants that were online freelancers as well. So they were graduate students in the university, but they also are digital workers, platform workers. They do online freelance work as well. So they're very familiar with the platform. But nonetheless, for some of the main platforms that were mentioned to us by the workers, we did a digital walkthrough of them, looking at the design of the platform, etc. And then when we realized the importance of Facebook groups, we followed the Facebook groups that were led by the influencers. And so it became apparent to us that Facebook groups were playing an important role for sharing of strategies among workers. But many of these Facebook groups were organized by what we call influencers. And so when we have interviewed the influencers, we requested for their permission to follow and join and study their Facebook groups. And so we managed to follow around 8 Facebook groups, and also we looked at the YouTube channels that corresponded to those particular influencers. They also maintained YouTube channels eventually. So these are examples of Filipino freelancing Facebook groups that you can see out there. And one particular example of a group that we followed, and we interviewed this particular influencer who created this platform, is Online Filipino Freelancers. You can see that there are thousands of members and followers of this platform. They have YouTube channel as well and a Facebook group. So I'll be talking briefly about what they talk about on these Facebook groups and what kinds of solidaristic formation we have seen in the context of these Facebook interactions or YouTube interactions. So the first important thing in the context of platform labor and social media here is how workers express both discontent and also construct labor mitigating strategies. So they recognize the difficulties and the challenges, but they also come up with ways by which they can help each other grapple with the difficulties of the platform. One important thing here is that unlike our regular jobs where there is a human resources office that helps us, how do you get promoted, what salary do you get, how do you become permanent, there's nothing like that in platform labor. Everything is automated. You have to come up with a nice portfolio. You just wait if a client hires you, but you don't know how to do that. And so at the same time, there is what we call labor arbitrage, where the clients can choose whichever worker offers the same expertise or skill for the cheapest cost. And so we can see that on the Facebook groups, the workers were sharing strategies of skill arbitrage and also how they can diversify platforms. So they will first complain about the platform, and then they will share strategies that, oh, you shouldn't stay with one platform. You have to move across platforms. You shouldn't have just one skill. You have to learn different skills that will give you leverage to move across different skills and different clients. Another thing that they talk about is rates, how to price yourself, and different workers, of course, including the influencers, would share strategies on how to price yourself. This is a tricky thing in platform labor because unlike Uber or Grab that dictates how much will be the cost for a particular transaction, in Crowdwork, it is the worker that bids for a job. And the worker can identify how much for each job. It's not that easy to calculate. So, for example, if I am writing for example, if I am doing a digital marketing job, so how much would I charge for this particular job? That depends on my portfolio, the client's capacity to pay, the scale of the job, how quick the turnover might be required, etc. And so here, workers share different strategies on how to negotiate rates. And also when they have already been working for clients for a long time, they will share strategies on how they can start to bargain for higher rates. The other odd thing with Crowdwork is that, again, local workers are working for foreign clients. Foreign clients work with different cultural expectations and work expectations, but your capacity to be hired again depends on how you build a good relationship with their client. And so this is a pressing strategy, again, that's shared in these Facebook groups, how to build a good relationship with a client and how to maintain a good reputation so that you have a high tendency to be rated well in the platform, because you get stars, like in Uber, you get a rating, and at the same time, you get the high tendency of being hired again. And lastly, within this cluster of labor mitigating strategies shared across social media is promoting financial literacy. And this is important for workers because labor seasonality is an issue among them. There are days or there are seasons when there's a lot of jobs. There are seasons when there are no jobs at all. But what they found out is that many workers suffer when they no longer have jobs. And so from these Facebook groups, interestingly, they have come together as a national cooperative, and they started to form a cooperative to work together to help workers become more financially literate by kind of coming together with some savings that they can pull together as workers. They also promote the idea of seeing themselves as professionals. So you can see the label, Filipino Online Professionals Cooperative, and not as workers, kind of to encourage them to charge better rates and not to underprice themselves. So earlier, I spoke about labor mitigating strategies. So these are very specific strategies to cope and survive. This second cluster, when I talk about number 2, is simply the idea of co-working together. So like in a regular co-working space, workers digital nomads will come together and work in a co-working space. Here amongst Filipino workers, co-working spaces are very, very expensive. One rental day is equal to already the one whole day of pay for some of the workers, and so it's very costly, and that's why they appear to be co-working, but on these Facebook groups. So they will share regularly, they will hang out, like as we will do in water coolers. They will share fruits of their freelancing careers, like what they managed to buy, what they managed to acquire, and they will share in an ambient nature, daily good vibes. So inspiring each other about the work that they do. So an example here is Philip PH Dad. So this is a Facebook group of father or dad platform workers. There's also a counterpart for mom workers. And in this particular group, they will just drink together on their work or sometimes even while working. So that is a kind of an ambient sharing of recognition that they're all freelance workers, but they can work together, but virtually. So here's a couple of quotes. So, hello, freelancer moms who are still working at this time. We should have a group for midnight virtual assistants. Freelancers, share your workspace. Here's mine. So, or what's your work playlist? What music do you listen to? In contrast to the first cluster of labor mitigating strategies, these are not intentional posts. They're just there to make a feeling that you are working with another person who shares the same kind of a working environment as you do. But as we write in the paper, it's an important function for workers to kind of feel a sense of identification and belonging. And the last one is where Facebook groups become a site for selling or promoting particular values. And when I speak about values, an idea of what is a good worker, what is an ideal work environment, and so on and so forth. As illustrated here in the bottom, becoming a millionaire freelancer. Here on YouTube, this particular influencer speaks about a set of recipes that will help a freelancer achieve success. And it includes here It's okay to do work for many hours for several days. It's okay to not charge very high initially, because eventually you will get fruits of your hard work. On the one hand, it helps workers survive and thrive. On the other, it also can be taken as a form of self-exploitation for some workers, in the sense that they have a vision that they can achieve some success, but it's okay to be in a precarious state right now. So it's an imagination of a possibility that may be achievable, but for many workers, it realistically is not. And so here I start to emphasize that in our research on social media and platform labor, we see another category, so another layer of platform workers who are selling ambiguity and opportunity. So they are transacting opportunities. So they're talking to workers about what opportunities there are on platform labor, and they are helping them navigate the ambiguity of platform labor. They help build skills. They help cascade imaginaries of success. They construct value of good digital labor. They establish and maintain authority through their social media networks, through their Facebook groups and their YouTube channels. But at the same time, the workers are, we interview the workers, how they think about these influencers, many of them actually acknowledge themselves as coached by or mentored by these influencers, meaning that they establish social capital by being attached to the influencer or the skill maker and the community within those Facebook groups that they belong to. So as an implication, I think this provides, essentially this work of the influencers is creating labor for the platforms. They are promoting platform labor. They are creating workers for the platform. And at the same time, it allows the platform to elide, and also the government, to elide their responsibilities of fixing the problems within the digital platform labor environment, because they're making the platform labor environment palatable and popular amongst the workers. And so when we speak about the notion of entrepreneurial solidarity, so based on our understanding of these kinds of interactions on social media, we came up with the concept of entrepreneurial solidarities to characterize these solidaristic forms as they emerge to help workers survive and thrive, but they do not necessarily challenge or pose strong challenges to the structural conditions of platform work. It helps the workers now, but for those who are not part of those groups and those clusters or formations, it becomes difficult for them because no one is really attending to them. Yeah, because there's no force to challenge the larger labor structures, then those workers who are in the fringes, who are not part of these groups, they have to work with the crumbs because they are not as entrepreneurial as the others. Now I'm going to go to some thoughts about social media and digital labor. And so after doing this study, we were thinking about what particular social media affordances facilitate solidaristic formations among workers. And I think we can reflect back on the literature, on what the literature says about the different affordances of social media. So the first is the idea of being aware of each other. So ambient awareness of each other's communication, conditions, and strategies. So they become aware about how the other person exists as a worker, but also how the other worker is able to survive. And that maybe I can copy that strategy of survival, use it for myself, right? The second one is the idea of ambient co-presence, that others are just there. I just know that they exist there and that they are struggling in the same way that I'm struggling, but they're also achieving in the same way that I'm achieving. So it's peripheral, but intense awareness that there are other workers who are sharing the same experience. And the last one is ambient affiliation. So we go to the level where they start to affirm shared values of you need to be entrepreneurial, you have to have grit and guts to be able to survive in this kind of an environment, and normalizing those values. And the visual and affective dimensions of social media communication makes this all possible. The sharing of images, the doing of Facebook Live, the sharing of videos, all come together and used by workers and influencers to be able to manifest further these affordances. The second point that I wanted to highlight is the duality of social media's role as it manifests for platform workers. And so, as I emphasize, social media is a site for platform worker sociality and solidaristic formations. We can study social media as a site for sociality. But at the same time, it becomes apparent that social media is also a site of digital labor, for digital labor. And it may be important to look at what these emerging layers of labor are being performed on social media. And this is nothing new, right? Because the work of Sarah Roberts on content moderators is already there, looking at the content moderators on social media. There's also a lot of literature on micro-celebrities and the labor of micro-celebrities, the works of Theresa Sen, Crystal Abedin, and Alice Marwick. But here, what I'm emphasizing is the role of influencers. They're like micro-celebrities as well, but they are selling aspirations for precarious workers, right? And so it's interesting how the micro-celebrity strategies are appropriated to sell aspirations for labor, but also at the same time, these selling of aspirations becomes a form of work in itself. These coaches sell their books, they monetize their labor on YouTube. They also sell training packages. Some training packages can cost up to $100, $200 for several modules. And so there is monetization as well. And many of these workers stop doing the work on the platform. They just now sell their training packages to these workers. The third point that I wanted to emphasize is the relationality between the social media world and the work world. And so that platform labor kind of appears in the black box. We can study it through a walkthrough method via studying the app. We can also interview the workers, but it's very different when you can see it, the conversations among workers on social media. It illustrates and illuminates the practices and their experiences as they share, as they speak, as they visibilize in the images that they share, in the music that they share, in the videos that they share. But at the same time, digital labor is shaped by workers' communicative practices on social media. As I showed earlier, work is created. At the same time, digital labor is promoted. So it creates a labor force through these Facebook conversations, and it maintains that labor force through these Facebook conversations. And fourth are continuities. And this is the thing that I'm still thinking through right now as I converse with other scholars doing work on platform labor. So it is possible that entrepreneurial solidarities are changing to other emerging collective formations. And we are already starting to see this. I don't have space to talk about these new collective formations, but we're seeing new configurations that are interesting as well. So the continuities and the possible changes in the formations. The second is the parallels, but maybe the differences or the distinctions in the social media engagements of different kinds of platform workers. I was speaking with Dr. Fernanda about how the experience of social media use of crowd workers might be similar or different in the social media grouping of Uber drivers, for example. And so I think it's interesting to see what will characterize those parallels, but what will characterize those differences as well. And then the last one is the parallels in the social media engagements of platform workers in the global north and in the global south and across regional and national contexts. So in a recent conference on platform labor organized by Cornell, there was a mention of how there are regional differences in experience. It's interesting to see this further, but also how perhaps solidaristic formations of similar kinds of workers can kind of come together and get integrated because they practically are working with the same platform, a global platform like Upwork in the end. So now I will close with some critical reflections on researching digital labor and social media. These are still continuing thoughts as well as we continue this research. So the first is the question of entry and access. So as I mentioned earlier, we entered the social media groups. So social media groups is a very rich environment to study. But the question there is always how to enter and access it. From our research, we entered the groups by having the trust and also access to the influencers who are moderating these groups. We received their permission, and then it was the members informed that we are. Yes?
Sorry for interrupt. We are not able to follow the PowerPoint presentation.
This one, the last one, is it?
I am seeing right now the relationality between social media and work world. I don't know if you change it or if you stop in this one, because Jose Miguel Tomacena also said that he cannot see the presentation.
The last slide is it? Interesting. Because I'm in my last slide right now. I'm not sure what you're not seeing entry, ecology, and ethics.
No. Sorry, it's difficult presentation online.
It's very strange because this is the slide in my screen right now. But it is my last slide. Maybe I can just stop sharing it and just stop.
Now I'm seeing it. No, if everybody is seeing.
All right, so I hope you can see it now. So what I was trying to say here is that how you enter the group is an important thing in thinking about working with Facebook groups or YouTube clusters or YouTube formations as well. So in our strategy, talk to influencers to be able to access them, but that might not be possible for all kinds of Facebook groups. But that was also necessarily the approach that we needed to take, because as far as procedural ethics is concerned, as far as our IRB is concerned, they wanted clear consent to be able to study Facebook groups. And so I think this becomes dependent on as well, or this becomes influenced as well by the kind of ethical considerations that you might have, or your institution might have as regards studying Facebook. The second one is the idea of ecology. Even as we look at initially Facebook groups, we realized that whatever is posted on Facebook, there is a spillover or a continuity with YouTube, and YouTube videos also continue on Facebook. But there are also workers who would tell us that they collaborate with each other for special kinds of workers who are working with the same client. For example, they will use WhatsApp, our WhatsApp version, which is Viber. Right? So there is an ecology of different social media platforms that these workers use. And even as we emphasize one platform, it's important to see the spillovers or the continuities and seeing them as an ecology of media that these workers navigate around. And then the third are questions of ethics. The dynamism between positionality and work and power dynamics. So being able to recognize your positionality as a researcher, and how you will judge the interactions there is. And so, for example, when we came into the field, we saw that we were exposed to a lot of literature casting the workers as precarious or digital kind of slaves or digital sweatshops. And when we first encountered the workers, I personally was surprised. Oh, they are quite happy and they're quite proud of their work. And so it became necessary for me to shrug off those biases and be able to understand where they are coming from. And that's when we realized that, oh yeah, because the other alternatives and choices are much worse than this kind of labor, but they need to try to make it work as well for themselves and try to improve the conditions in as much as they can. The second is the idea of private and public, and this is connected to entry and access as well. So the idea of even though workers give you the consent, there is still a lot of decision making needed on what to include in presentations, what to include in as you write the article. So what counts as data, and also what should be documented as data, and what can be published data. It's a continuing grappling of consideration of the workers' positions and also any possibility of threat or risk there might be for them. So, for example, some workers would openly criticize the platforms, and even though they give consent, it's important to be concerned about what implications there might be if we do not anonymize what they share, or if we do not, we are not careful about not identifying who they are in how we share them in our publications. And the last one that I wanted to emphasize, especially when working with workers, is goal vis-a-vis their expectations as workers, right? So, of course, when we come into the research, commonly the goal is for knowledge building, to be able to understand this environment, sometimes as scholars and as researchers. But some researchers doing labor research kind of take a more activist stance, right? So I think this is open to researchers depending on what their choices are. But it's also possible for our goals to change as we get immersed into the environment. And so, as in my own experience, the initial understanding is to be able to understand and unpack platform labor environment. But as we got to understand more workers and as we got to talk to the workers, we realized that some workers were asking us, if you get to talk to the government, or can you write to the media to be able to tell us that they need to support these worker clusters, the cooperative especially, right? Or we want to challenge the platform. Can you help us? Can you help us connect to the government, or can you tell the government what kinds of needs workers require, specifically in the context of platform labor? And so there is expectation about what kind of interventions researchers can play for these workers. And having realized those expectations, we also changed kind of our goals. We realized that whatever data we had, it was imperative for us to get to share this with policymakers. And so we started to engage with conversations with local policymakers on crafting support mechanisms for platform workers locally. And the last one that I will speak about is data extraction versus collaboration. And this requires constant engagement with workers, but also, I guess, especially for precarious kinds of workers, it's important to be cognizant of the dilemma between just extracting their data and making them aware why you are studying this and in what ways this data is going to be used and what for and for what purposes. So kind of seeing it more as collaborative work with the workers rather than extracting data and getting it for your own benefit. So I think I'll stop talking there. Thanks very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Cheryll, for your inspiring presentations. I have questions, but I would prefer that people from the audience to express their concerns and questions. You can share your video now and your microphone if you want to make questions. Usually it's this awkward moment that everybody gets quiet until the first person starts asking. Carlos, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. I hear the echo, un echo. Who has the, now? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Fernanda already told us that your research was very, very close to our own research about people working in the platforms. I found so many inputs and many issues to discuss, to exchange information. We are just beginning our research, so maybe in the future we'll have more information to share with you. But, well, I found many things very, very interesting. Now we are working with a union, Comisiones Obreras, is a traditional union from Spain. And when you talk about this issue about the organization of these workers, And that's the main issue for the syndicates, for the unions here in Spain and everywhere, I guess, because the unions were created for industry in 19th century, and they don't know how to deal with the new workers. So when we propose the union to collaborate with us, they really like that, because they say, okay, we need to understand how these people think, how they work, how they arrive to this environment, and how we can help them to organize themselves. I found really interesting also from my own perspective when you talk about how the communication in social media shapes this digital labor, because right now we are starting with our first interviews. We are testing the methodology in these weeks, and I only interview a guy, and he's a young man. He created a little company with his friends. He's in the intermediation level between the platforms and the workers. So he was before a worker, very, very flexible. He discovered the business, so he created with a couple of friends a company, for a very little company. It's a startup with 6 people, to intermediate so that was a big surprise for me and for the rest of the research team, because we suppose that you imagine that you have the big platform and you have the workers, and in the middle we have found now there are many companies moving there. And this is crazy, because in the 90s, when we have the first wave of cyber cultures, everyone said, oh, with the web we will not have more intermediation, this will be a direct relation. They used to talk about the death of the middleman. And what we are seeing is that these platforms are the new intermediators, but we are in this specific case, we are finding new levels of intermediation that participate in this flexibility and support this. Have you found something like that I'm thinking in the lowest level, people, riders, very low level of works, let's say. Thank you very much. Later we talk about ecology.
Yes, definitely. Thanks very much for that, Carlos. Quite fascinating, the notion of intermediary. When I was mentioning that there seems to be other kinds of formations that I will not have the time to expound on, because I promised Fernando I will speak for 30 minutes. But yes, certainly the intermediary. So what workers would do is that some of the more prominent workers who become trusted by clients, they get larger projects, then they will outsource these projects to relatives, sometimes neighbors. So some workers that I interviewed, they are based in Manila, and they will re-outsource some chunks of the job to as far-flung provinces where they have connections, so that they can make the cost more of value, right, for them, because they can now kind of cut the work into smaller pieces. So it's a very fascinating phenomenon. And you're right as well. Some of the workers who are kind of more in the critical, I would say, so there's that formation of re-outsourcing, but there are some workers who become critical of the platforms also. This is more recent. After our work on entrepreneurial solidarities, we got to interview some workers who got tired of global platforms. And what they did is they got their old clients and they set up their own startup, and they come up with their own design of labor platform that is trying to be fairer in terms of design. Right? And so they are now targeting more local clients rather than foreign clients, but the design of the platform is a bit more fair. So this is the part where we are continuing to study as well, that new formations among workers. Yes, really fascinating intermediation.
Thank you very much. In this interview with this young man, this is a very little company. They don't have any high tech or application, nothing. They're just working in the lowest level to organize the different areas and to hire riders, because right now, I don't know the situation in your country, but here now, right now in Spain, especially in the big cities, it's very difficult to find riders, because there's so much, the amount of work has increased too much, and there's not enough people for doing these jobs. So these little intermediation companies, they're stealing rates between them. And maybe they pay 10 cents of euro more than the other one to get the people. It's really, really complex, this level. And when I interviewed him, he was using or trying to use a language like a Silicon Valley startup. And they had no technology. They're a very low level company just managing marginal people. But the discourse was very, he was trying to develop a discourse of a high-tech company, a startup, something like that. No, you know, the mythology of the garage and the new company was very strong, I guess. So these are the first inputs we are getting from the field. But this connection between the families is very important. And I think Deborah, Fernanda, Nuria, take note because we should also check if we have something like this here in Spain. Thank you very much.
I think just another note is that I think the interesting to think about is the movement from formality and automation to informality. And still, we will think that everything is becoming more formalized by the platform, everything is automated by the platform. But at the local level, there are these interesting creative strategies that are very informal and that map onto communities or local informal sectors as well.
Thank you. I will think I'm not an economist, but we should ask someone who knows about the capitalist economy, because maybe capitalism generates intermediation. There's no way, even if we have the last technology, maybe this is a condition of capitalism to put people in the middle to make business. I shut up. Other people maybe they want to ask more questions.
No problem, Carlos. Thank you, Cheryl. It was very interesting. And Carlos, the question also was very interesting. You are talking about this Silicon Valley talk. I was also testing the interview, and one of the answers I received was that to be writer was important, is to be my own boss. So this idea that also they are workers that you explained, they don't see them as workers, but more like as an entrepreneurs. I don't know if you're going to continue find across the study, because we are just testing before we really start the study. And we can find lots of parallels. I've been observing as well Facebook groups of writers, and you can see that they try to help each other, but they also have some people sharing these intermediaries that Carlos was talking about, like promoting some companies or even renting their own accounts. So it's like the precarization of the precarization. So this was very interesting. I had a question. I don't know if somebody else have a question, but I have this question because you were talking about the ethical concerns depending on your institution, like for you to work with Facebook groups and work with this kind of workers. We are now like in this part of ethical protocols, like we are trying to get the approval of the ethical protocols. And I find it very complicated from the side of, unfortunately, the institution wants to back us up. I know that they are doing the best for us not having any problem. But when you have lots of forms or a lot of papers to sign, how do you deal with it online? How did you manage to get their informed consent?
Yes, I can imagine the struggle right now if you are doing this, the getting the informed consent online. So, well, thankfully for us, we managed to do all the field work prior to the pandemic. So we, as I mentioned, we have been doing this study for the past 5 years already, but continually. So the last interview that we had was in far provinces in the Philippines. That was just before the lockdown here in Manila. But there's one thing, it depends from institution to institution, but our institution requires us, if we are to study a Facebook group, we need to be able to get consent from the moderator, and that a proof that the study is to be the Facebook group is to be studied. So it has to be posted by the moderator that there's going to be a study to be done there. of course, the tricky thing is that, well, one can say that only the moderator allowed it, which is the influencer, but it has to be posted within the platform, and that has to be screenshot and posted. So I do not know for you if you will be required to submit all informed consent of all the members of the Facebook group, but certainly if you interview anyone, you will have to compile all those consent forms. And I know it's hard. We do this for another research, not this one, especially for people in the provinces who just don't have connections or a way to sign the forms. Especially, I can imagine for the drivers, how do they sign the forms? It's a challenge, I can imagine. What we did was for that particular project, it's not a digital labor project. What we asked from our IRB is to get an acknowledgement, a form of an acknowledgement from the interview that he or she is agreeing and that he or she has read the informed consent form. So you can work it out in the context of your own institution, depending on what they will allow you to do.
Thank you, Cheryl. This question we also did in another session, because always I think ethics is something to discuss about. Nuria, go ahead.
Okay, right. Hi, nice to say hello to you. I come from La Salle University in Madrid, so we're part of the same international experience, let's say. I wanted to ask you, I'm interested about the fact of this sense of belonging to the community, because as far as I see, I'm not really sure whether you observe that this sense of belonging is helping these groups move forward in their conditions, in their work conditions, or on the other hand, it's even perpetuating these precarious conditions, like, so we all belong to the same group. This is what we have, as Fernanda was mentioning before. I am my own boss. So it's a bit of tricky, like how in this movement and in this socioeconomic context, how this is being dealt with within these groups. I hope I have made myself understood.
Yeah, I think I got your point, and I think you're very correct. It's really an ambivalent kind of a solidarity, right? That's why when we label it entrepreneurial solidarities, on the one hand, they are helping each other thrive, where when they see this, in the context though that they see platform labor as perhaps the best option there is that's available for them. And if we look at it in the context where they cannot see other better work options, because in the Philippines, either you are also doing some other informal work with also no security, also precarious, or you don't have a job at all, maybe we will just choose this. But still, this is precarious, and you're totally correct. It's still, although they are trying to help each other try to make it better, they're helping each other strategize so that they can earn a little bit better, so that the condition can be a little bit better, so that they can bargain with the client better. But overall, the platform itself, the platform labor itself, has its precarious conditions that they're not able to challenge, because the focus is to be able to help each other thrive. And so even for myself, in terms of how to see this, it is I find myself in an ambivalent way to judge this situation, because on the other hand, many of these workers don't have any other choice but to thrive in this space as well. Mm-hmm. But thank you for your point. It's really very something that we need to think about as we work with workers involved in precarious conditions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Deborah Lanzani is with the hand. So, Deborah, if you want to make a question, go ahead.
Hi everyone. I think I really enjoyed the workshops, Cheryl. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi.
I think it was great, and it was said, it resonates a lot of things that we are doing. I have two questions mainly, and I think I have many things that I want to talk with you, but I think at the moment the most useful thing is ask just two questions. One is about, it's kind of methodological, but it's more about fieldwork, and you start the presentation talking about how decentering from digital make you understand what actually was the object of study. But then at the end of the presentations, you came with the notion of social media separated of work and job and practices of work, and how they communicate between each other and how they shape, as you say, exactly shape the work. Social media shape the work. But I want to know if that distinction is coming from the fieldwork. I mean, people understand they are doing different things when they do social media and when they work, or is something that you you used to make a more like, you know, theoretical distinction or a distinction useful for the research. That's one question. Another question that connected with that is, when you talk about work, how do you conceptualize work? Because in our like few interviews and in my work in automation, I work with techies, and one of a project of automation of in other industries. What I'm realizing, I'm not even anymore to do the distinction of something that cleaning in a clean way is work, and other thing that is other realms connected with work. So I think my two questions are, this distinction is coming from the fieldwork. Is a distinction you are doing for something specifically? And second, how you are conceptualizing digital work or digital labor in your own research, not, I mean, theoretically, but thank you. I cannot hear you.
We're not hearing you.
Sorry, thanks very much for that. Those are very important and interesting questions. I hope I understood it correctly. So when I mentioned decentering the digital, so I think I rephrase it a little bit, looking at the digital amid the broader environment. But but that idea is inspired by the argument of digital ethnography, digital ethnographers, Pink et al., about, even though we are studying a digital phenomenon, and specifically digital labor, it's almost paradoxical to center the digital from digital labor. But what I mean when I say the digital amid the broader labor environment is that, for example, if we had zeroed in on just social media, there may be a broader context of the labor structures in the Philippines, for example, that we will miss. Understanding the broader context where platform labor operates, right, will be a huge miss that will allow us to contextualize the conversations that they're happening on social media, kind of to put it in a better perspective. I think that's, I hope I understood the question, but that is how I will address it. So it is a strategy of the fieldwork guided by our goal of understanding deep structures and deep stories. When we say structures, I wanted to look at the larger context, and then, but social media conversations allowed us to kind of go back and forth with what the conversations in social media was telling us about the larger structures of labor at the backdrop of platform labor. The second one is digital work, and this is very interesting. So even in the conversation about labor, so different scholars are asking question, what should labor encompass? And some of them include labor, games of labor, and other different kinds of labor. But I think for this particular study, we are looking at people who are performing work with pay. And when I mentioned that, so of course, this is very obvious for crowd workers because they will perform a piece of work, right? it can be a micro task or a large project, and they can get paid by that. But of course, mediated by the platform. But when I mentioned that social media also creates new kinds of labor, this is because these influencers are also getting paid, getting value from the kind of community building, the kind of promotion. They also get a financial exchange from whatever kind of work that they do. And so, and it's interesting to see the function of that intermediation and how new financial labor transactions are manifesting from what we might think initially, or what we have thought initially, as just, they're just conversing on social media. And then we realize, oh, someone is making, doing work here. But when we talk to the influencers, they strategize. They think carefully about their courses. They think carefully about how they present themselves on the YouTube. They think carefully about how to package their modules. So it is a form of work in this sense.
Yeah, so
I hope I understood it. Sorry, I'm not sure if
I will try to refine the question, because I think is exactly what you're saying. In that, I get what you refer when you talk about work and piece of work on working in social media, and I totally get the decentering of the digital aspect of the phenomenon of work relationships and structures and whatever happened. But the point is, my question is about, you take social media amid all of this to analyze specifically something, and then you say they are all connected, but then you, at the end of the presentation, you just conceptualize social media as something different of work, and you say actually they work on social media and they do things that are a piece of work in social media. But how we are conceptualizing work, because for me it's like, it doesn't make sense in our project. I mean, this is really an egoistic question, because I want to know if that's something that when people work, they know they are doing work when they socializing in the media or doing things with media, they don't know. And that's one question. I mean, in the field where you think you have seen people working and knowing that they are working in social media beyond monetization, I mean, because they are getting money, so that is kind of the sign of work in our world, right? But the question is, this is coming from fieldwork. You haven't seen in fieldwork, they are in some way aware of their working when they look for tools, these skill makers or this, they know the ones learning the skills that they are working actually when they learn skills and things like that. That's the one question. And that is, we still, and this maybe is a more like if you have any reflection or any thoughts about, we still can separate the work, the piece of work, as you said, to do social media in our world. I mean, as academics or digital laborers or whatever, it makes sense theoretically or conceptually. That are my two questions, actually.
I'm not sure if I did get it quite, I did get it clearly. But I guess, again, the centering, looking at it at a broader context. But of course, for this particular talk, I had to highlight the intersections of digital labor and social media. And so I did emphasize these transactions that are taking place in the context of social media. But we could see the whole platform labor as operating in the context of in the larger backdrop that are not just happening within social media. There's a lot of that other things. I'm not necessarily able to emphasize that, but they are there, as we were talking earlier about the role of intermediaries, about the kinds of work and labor that's performed outside of social media. That brings, that kind of still connects to whatever conversations are happening in the context of social media work. If I got the question on the work that we do on social media and whether we recognize the work, I'm not sure if I got that correctly, but we all do work on social media. Is that what you're trying to say? Some people recognize it, some people financially monetize it, but in one way or the other, we do some kind of work. And that is true. Some people will call it work, right, conceptually, and it is, you're correct, it is a question of how you conceptualize work and how you conceptualize labor. Of course, some of the literature will be making a distinction between different kinds of work and different kinds of labor that are performed, and whether how we can look at the role of value in relation to the work that is performed there. But you're correct. Many would argue that even as academics, all the kind of things that we do on social media or other kinds of sectors of doing work on social media can be counted as work as well.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Deborah, for the questions. Deborah always have very challenging questions. Is a classic for who knows her. Somebody else has questions? Somebody would like to ask something else? I'm encouraging everybody to raise the hand. Okay, the silence again. Cheryl, I'll ask one question if nobody else has any more questions. What I find interesting that you are talking about the kind of media ecology of the platforms when you are studying digital labor and how they move from YouTube to Facebook to WhatsApp. One question I have, could you access like WhatsApp groups as well, like more private spaces? Or how you analyze this media ecology? I don't know if Carlos, because he's the specialist in media ecology, if you wanna add something to my question, but otherwise it's my curiosity.
It's almost close to impossible for us to study private excuse me, private messaging apps, because our personal IRB has much stringent policies if we are studying. So WhatsApp is not very popular in the Philippines. It is here, but the more popular app is Viber. But Viber functions in the same way, but because of I think our ethics board's understanding of these private messaging apps, they have much more stringent rules, and it will require us to get the consent of each person participating there. But ethically as well, there my thinking is that there is a notion of people joining specific private groups that the conversations are very private, and it depends on what groups, or depend on WhatsApp. Some are maybe designed to be more open than others, but I cannot say more because I have not started studying this. This was just raised to us by some workers when they were narrating the different platforms that they work with. I know that at the last Association of Internet Researchers conference, there was a presentation on a panel that looked at WhatsApp research, and if I'm not mistaken, that study was done in the context of Indonesian workers, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I can look it up. It was a panel organized by Emma Bolsh, and yeah, I can try to look it up and see if there is anything published in relation to that. I believe they have published a special issue on WhatsApp.
Marce Oliva has a question. Marce, if you want to do it, go ahead. Thank you, Cheryl, for entering.
Yes, thank you, Cheryl, for the presentation. It was really fascinating. I'm sorry because I think that my camera isn't working. I'm not sure why, but well, you can hear me, right? At least. Okay.
I can hear you.
You can see me now. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, it was really fascinating, and I wanted to know how about emotional labor? I mean, for these online freelancers, I mean, showing passion, which is like a mandatory rule in this new entrepreneurial labor, or in these entrepreneurial labor imaginaries. What about this idea of passion? Because I saw in one of your slides that there were a particular page where it was saying, here's a place to rant about the job, right? So there's this idea of finding places to complain, but there's also this perception that they have to show passion regarding their work, and how is this equilibrium between the passion and the complaint, how is working? Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. Yes, I'm glad you raised the question of emotional labor. It does manifest a lot, and I think it manifested a lot as well in our conversations with female workers, and more so in the context of the idea that they are working with foreign clients and in this particular labor arrangement, it is the client that has the larger control on whether you will get retained. The client can terminate your contract immediately. And so the workers would speak about, of course, they don't use the term emotional labor, but they will speak about, for example, one would say that, oh, I am very happy because I can go back to work and attend to my client the day or a couple of days after giving birth. And I'm so glad that this platform labor allows me to do this immediately after this. So, but because I have a deadline to make, and even some workers would say, oh, I will stay up late at night because I want to be able to please my client. But that goes beyond the actual work itself. So sometimes their clients will come to the Philippines, they will want to tour the Philippines, and then they will do that extra work touring them around as well. But they do this, some of them are trying to establish a good relationship with the clients, believing as well that this will allow them to get sustainable clientele in the context of labor seasonality. But at the same time, it requires a lot of emotional labor from them, extending the work that they already are, they are already contracted for, and that's not necessarily paid within that transaction. But some clients pay them, some clients give them gifts as well. So some arrangements are better than others, but others put in a lot of emotional labor that's not necessarily retained with value. Yeah, thank you for that question.
No, thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Marcel, for the question. We set up the session until 11:30. We are already passing 1 minute, so I don't know if somebody else has more questions. If somebody has a question, we have this last question. Somebody? Nobody? Anybody? Okay, so Cheryl, I would, as nobody raised the hand, I would thank you very much. It was very inspiring, your talk. You touch points that for us in both projects will be very important. And also not only our project, I think some PhD students can reflect on their own work later on. And I hope to see you soon, though the pandemic is like this, and hope we can collaborate together. And it was really, really amazing, your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fernanda, and thank you very much for your questions. Yeah, they're really brilliant questions, and I really look forward to those doing platform labor research. I really look forward to exchanging in the future and see some similarities, but also differences in our findings. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, and everybody.
Thank you very much.
One bureaucratic thing: if you didn't register through the Eventum, if you need a certificate, you can write to this email from the secretary and ask for the certificate. Thank you very much, Cheryl, and thank you all for attending this workshop.